I'm from the British Nutrition Foundation, just again, where I'm a nutrition scientist, and I'm just going to try and provide a bit of an overview of some of the nutritional considerations if restricting or eliminating animal-based products from the diet. So as we all know, interest in veganism, vegetarianism, flexitarianism has been increasing a lot in the last few years, but I think it's important to note that from what we know, strict vegetarians and vegans still only account for quite a small proportion of the population. However, the people that are looking to reduce their meat consumption, as you can see here, is more considerable. And also just a quick reminder that when we talk about some of these different dietary patterns that are more plant-based, this includes a few different categories or definitions, including especially for vegetarians, depending on whether or not dairy or eggs are included in the diet. Okay, so what are some of the important nutrients that might need to be considered if excluding animal-based products or restricting them in the diet? So what I've done here is just to select a few key micronutrients that are very important for growth and development that are, from what we know from the National Diet and Nutrition Survey, at the moment are mainly contributed in the diet from animal-based sources. And this includes in particular vitamin B12, which is only available in a naturally occurring form from animal-based foods. And then the other thing to consider is the availability or bioavailability of these nutrients. For example, heme iron from meat is more bioavailable generally than from plant sources. And also calcium, iron, zinc, and some other micronutrients, their bioavailability may be inhibited by certain compounds in plants, such as oxalate or phytate. And in the case of vitamin D, that's something that it's recommended we should consider supplementing, starting about this time of year, actually. But if you're choosing vitamin D3, that's not typically vegan-friendly, although some vegan-friendly versions are available, which might be important because that can be more effective in raising vitamin D status than vegan-friendly D2 supplements. Okay, so I wanted to talk about infants and young children because this is, of course, a very important time for growth and development. And a fairly recent review showed that in infants right up to age 11, children that were following a vegetarian diet did not really show consistently any differences in their iron or zinc intake or status. And also another review of studies that looked at the prevalence of iron deficiency anemia, which is a particular nutrient of concern, found that actually estimates for deficiency vary quite widely between different studies, and it very much depended on which markers were used to try and define iron deficiency. And then also vitamin B12, which I mentioned before, overt cases of clinical deficiency are rare, and they are typically restricted to exclusively breastfed infants that are born to mothers following a vegan diet. And then moving on a little bit in the life course to talk about adolescence. So I've put this figure up here first just to illustrate that from what we know, adolescents in general tend to eat quite a poor quality diet, especially if we're considering micronutrient intakes. So what you can see in the figure here shows the proportion of boys or girls aged 11 to 18 that are not meeting or not getting an adequate intake of these micronutrients. And you can see that for magnesium and iron in particular, that's a real cause for concern amongst adolescent girls. And a recent study jumping to the US of adolescent vegetarians is quite interesting because this actually showed that there was no difference in micronutrient intakes for some nutrients. There were actually higher intakes among the vegetarians for quite a few, and the only micronutrient where there was evidence of any lower intakes among the vegetarians was zinc. But it's important to note that this study looked at schools where a large proportion of the students were from an Adventist background, and it has been shown that they tend to have a higher dietary quality in general compared to the general US adolescent population. So that raises the question of, well, do vegetarians or vegans that are teenagers, does this actually have a detrimental or a potentially beneficial impact on their nutrient intakes? And so I'd just like to summarize very quickly. So yes, while excluding animal-based products or restricting them in the diet could create a potential cause for concern around some micronutrients, there's not really any consistent evidence in the literature to suggest this is a cause for concern for infants and young children or for adolescents. and that with teenagers, they appear to eat a fairly poor quality diet in general. And so overall, focusing on dietary quality and diversity might be what's most important. And I've just put a figure here of the Eat Well guide, which I'm sure most or all of you recognise, just to re-emphasise the fact that if we follow the general government guidelines, we are already eating a predominantly plant-based diet with only a small proportion contributed by animal-based foods. Thank you.